Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. That's right, we're ranking Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice is a 2024 American dark fantasy comedy horror film set decades after Beetlejuice from 1988. Lydia Dietz, now a mother, struggles to keep her family together in the wake of a loss as the specter Beetlejuice returns to haunt her. Let's just get right into those 10 essential aspects of a movie. First is plot. Does the movie follow a comprehensive story arc and is plausible within the world that has been created? Now, lately there have been a lot of movies that have come out that are sequels of previous classics that are just money grabs. And I feel you should not make a movie, especially about one that is a classic that people love, that has a good audience. You should not make another one just for the sake of another one. You should make it because you want to bring a different angle or a different aspect of the story that wasn't able to be told to now be told. It has to be interesting enough and important enough to make another movie. For this movie, I don't necessarily feel they did that. They just made another one for the sake of making another one. That being said, the plot of this movie is boring for the first half. I was bored. It was somewhat confusing. There was a lot going on, and I just was not having a good time. There is a point, and if you've seen the movie, you know what point I'm talking about, that the movie kind of turns around and ramps up a little bit, and the story gets interesting. That I enjoyed. And actually, I felt the plot from that point on was more interesting than the plot of the original movie. That being said, it doesn't bring anything new. There's nothing dramatic and new. It's just a little more interesting. Another problem with this plot was there was characters that just did not need to be there. They didn't go into them very much, and they took up screen time for really no reason, because one of the problems with this movie is towards the end, everything just wraps up really quick. They have a couple storylines going on that they're telling, and each one of them gets a couple scenes, and it jumps from here to there, and then all of a sudden, it's over. That's it. All those storylines over, and I didn't think it wrapped up really well. I thought it was kind of rushed and wasn't done to the quality that it should have been done. I feel the plot would have been better if they just narrowed it down and didn't try to tell all of these different stories and just stuck to one, maybe two. It's not the end of the world. The plot isn't bad, but I don't know if it was really that good. Second is attraction. Does the movie have an interesting premise with a high entertainment value? Like I said earlier, the movie doesn't bring anything new. So if you weren't really a fan of the first one, or you thought it was just okay, this one isn't going to bring anything to the table that is going to attract you to the movie now, to the series now. However, if you just love Beetlejuice, one thing I think is people just love this movie or love these characters for the fact that it's Halloween, it's got a very fall vibe, and there are those people out there that just, they live for fall, they live for Halloween. And those people love the atmosphere of this movie. It still brings that. And so that attraction is what has made this movie series successful, is the atmosphere of it. And that I still think is present. And so if that is something that is attractive to you, I still feel it is going to bring you in and you're going to enjoy that. Third is theme. What message or truth is the movie trying to convey? The theme of this movie, I feel, it's a pretty simple one. It's just about relationships. It's about, the mother-daughter relationship, and mother-father is very prevalent in this movie, and I feel they were just going for more of that 80s feel, that heartwarming story where everything just kind of wraps up for the better in the end. It's about finding your place in this world, and something that is a theme between the last movie and this movie is the concept of death, how to deal with death, where do you go, what's your place. Those messages and themes are still in this movie. Fourth is dialogue. Is there a real feel to the conversations? Now, normally I judge this based on how well the characters talk to each other? Do you feel it is real and normal, like a conversation you would have or feel you would have in a certain situation? This movie, you can't really judge it that way. One thing I felt in the first movie and watching this movie is it feels very play-like. And I would say movie theater plays don't usually have dialogue that is very normal, and it fits that genre. And that's how I feel this goes. I feel the dialogue was good for the characters that they were portraying, and the characters aren't normal. They're weird, and they have a unique way of talking, or they have a weird way that they perceive the world, and I feel that they captured that well in this movie. They talked the way the characters felt they would talk. I feel like they did a good job. It wasn't anything outstanding, but it fit what it needed to. Fifth is acting. Are the characters convincing? This movie, the acting was what it needed to be. I felt there wasn't many scenes that required really good acting out of characters. They just did what they were asked to do, and they did it well. However, the person I felt that needed to do really, really well to make this movie great was Michael Keaton as Beetlejuice. Now, when he did this role originally, I felt he nailed it. I felt he was high energy, he was cracking jokes, he was super physical, and whenever he was on screen, he was captivating. That's who you wanted to watch. And ultimately, didn't have a lot of screen time in the first one, but he was so good that you just wished he was in the movie more. This time around, I felt he should have been in the movie less. I didn't like him very much in this movie. Michael Keaton is just older. He couldn't be as physical, and though he was cracking the same jokes, he wasn't as dominating of a presence in this movie. And personally, I really just was disappointed, and I didn't like it. I felt if you're gonna reprise your role as a character that people love, you need to be able to be that character to the best as possible. And I felt he didn't. I felt he couldn't be that character. He couldn't be as physical and as crazy and as loud as he was the first time, just because he's older. And that was disappointing. I thought his performance as Beetlejuice in this movie was just lackluster. 6 is cinematography. Is there a creative use of lighting, setting, and wardrobe to convey emotion? Now, the emotional aspect of this movie, I just don't think was done that well. Something that I don't feel was done well in the original as well. Outside of the comedy aspect, it is a funny movie, but any other emotion as far as sadness or happiness or tense, I didn't really feel those things. I don't feel there's enough character development in this movie to get you to feel some intense emotions. But it is funny at times when it needs to be, and a character like Beetlejuice brings a nice humor. But what really elevates this movie, along with the original, was the style. The style of this movie is good. It's awesome. There's always something to look at, and something I enjoyed about the movie was there's a good portion of it that takes place in the afterlife, and that's the style. That's the part that gets styled that is so interesting. That's what I love. That's what other people love. There's so many things to look at. There's funny things. I love looking at all the ways that people have died, and most of the time they choose very funny ways people died. And if you liked it in the first one, you're still gonna like it in the second one. I don't necessarily think it brought anything new to the table. I don't think it showed any parts that were incredibly interesting or super different, but the parts that it did were still following that cool style, and it's really one of the saving points of this movie, and I would say the first one as well. 7th is editing, and this is all about the pace of the movie. The movie is an hour and 44 minutes long. I felt that was a good time. It was somewhat bordering on long, but for the most part, it wrapped up when it needed to wrap up. Unfortunately, I felt there's a lot of scenes that could have been cut out and added to the end, new scenes that helped slow down the ending of the movie. It just ended so quickly, and that kind of sucked, but the overall runtime for the story was good. 8th is soundtrack. Now, I normally do not talk about soundtrack that much unless I notice it in a movie. There's usually music in a movie at some point. However, most movies, it doesn't really play a key role, and it's really not that important. But I only bring it up because when it is important and it's done really well, it can elevate scenes in movies by a lot. I would say in this movie, it is important to the movie. Now, it doesn't help emotionally for me in this movie, and I actually did not love all of the scenes that were musical, just because there's some lip syncing done in the movie that I thought was just really poorly done, and it didn't look that good. So it just kind of was, it just wasn't done well, and that's why I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't necessarily the music aspect, but music does play a bigger role in this movie than it does for a normal movie. Ninth is directing. Now, I feel the director is in charge of the previous 8 aspects. He's the one that's got to give it the stamp of approval and put it all together and make a good movie. Now, the director of this movie is Tim Burton, very famous director. If you have not watched some of his movies, I suggest that you do. This is his 20th movie. His previous 19 were Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice, Batman, Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns, Ed Wood, Mars Attacks, Sleepy Hollow, Planet of the Apes, Big Fish, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Corpse Bride, Sweeney Todd, Alice in Wonderland, Dark Shadows, Frankenweenie, Big Eyes, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, Dumbo, and finally Beetlejuice. Now, I've seen quite a few of Tim Burton's movies. This movie is okay in his representation as a director. The style is really well done and something that I feel he brings to the table that's unique as a director. If you haven't seen any of his movies, there are several movies that he doesn't quite go into style, but does a really good job with other emotional aspects, and then he has other movies where he does great with both. I feel this is a mid-road movie for him. It's just okay. I think he's made better movies. I think he's made worse movies. But overall, in this movie needed to bring the vibe and feeling of the original movie, and that's exactly what it does. I think he does a good job with this movie with what he was aiming to do. 10th is time. Does it stand the test of time? Now, this movie is honestly forgettable. Unless you're somebody that just loves Beetlejuice, you'll go back and watch this movie. But personally, the only reason this movie will ever stay around is the feeling and the vibe of Halloween and fall, because that's what it brings. But it doesn't bring anything different than the original movie, so I don't know if you would necessarily watch this one over the original, other than maybe just the improved visuals. But otherwise, I feel this movie is very forgettable outside of this season. Now for the ratings. Rotten Tomatoes critics gives it a 77. The audience gives it an 82. And IMDb gives it a 71. I would be comfortable with that 77 range. I think IMDb has got it right. It's a very regular movie. It doesn't do anything really poorly, but is elevated by the style, and that's really what makes this movie even good outside of just being a really regular movie. Is the style. It's unique, it's interesting. That 77 I feel is honestly a real sweet spot for where this movie belongs. Now for the rankings. For the year of 2024 on the entertainment side, out of 14 movies, it's going to be 5th, just below Alien Romulus and above Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Look at it above Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. It's a shorter movie. It's easier to watch. It has some comedic aspects. All those things make it a pretty easy decision over Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes as far as entertainment. It's just an easier movie to watch. and has some comedic aspects that just really aren't there in Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. It's below Alien Romulus just because I felt it was boring. The first half of this movie is boring. Now, it definitely picks up in the second half, but there's a part of this movie that's just not interesting. Alien Romulus, I felt, was entertaining throughout. It does a good job of keeping you wondering, entertained / on your seat for most of the movie. So that's why it gets a bump over Beetlejuice. For cinematography, it's going to be 4th out of 14, just below Trap and above Deadpool and Wolverine. The only thing pulling for Deadpool and Wolverine is the world aspect of it. The fact that the Marvel Universe is expansive and it really touches on that. That's a part of cinematography that I think is interesting and complex, and that's what gives Deadpool and Wolverine a little bit of credit cinematically. But Beetlejuice, it has a style that is very interesting, and that to me was better than what Deadpool and Wolverine had going for it. Deadpool and Wolverine kind of has a background thing going on. Beetlejuice, so though the setting is a little bit of a background piece, it's very important throughout the entire movie and is what makes a movie attractive. So that's why I kind of give it that bump over, is because I feel it's unique, and that's a good representation to cinema, is the unique storytelling that it can bring. Now, it's below Trap because Trap really had some emotion to it. I really felt anxious, and there's a psychological aspect of me wanting to know what is going through this guy's head, and had me rooting for somebody I don't know if I necessarily should be rooting for. It just did some good things emotionally that Beetlejuice doesn't do, and that to me is more important than the style aspect. A visual style aspect comes second to the emotion for me. If you can really get me into a movie enough that I am actually anxious, my heart rate is up, or I care about these characters so much, then you have done a better job than a movie that is just appealing to look at. And that's just how I feel. So that's why it's going to be below Trap. For the decade of the 2020s, on the entertainment side, it's going to be the exact same place. And on the cinematic side, it's still going to be 4th, but this time it's going to be above Gran Turismo. It's above Gran Turismo because Gran Turismo just does a good job as a movie whole, and it has some visual aspects that make it interesting, but Beetlejuice has a lot more, and I feel that style that it brought was better than the style of Gran Turismo. It was more unique and more interesting, and that's why it's going to be above Gran Turismo. For all time, on the entertainment side, out of 21 movies, it's going to be 10th, just below The Mist and above Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Now, it's above Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes for the exact same reason as before, but it's below The Mist just because I would rather watch The Mist. There's an aspect of Beetlejuice that is boring, and though The Mist may have some parts, for the most part, it's got this unique, cool presence to the movie that makes it interesting throughout the entire movie, and that's really what I'm knocking down on Beetlejuice. It's just that it has a point where it's just boring. The Mist, I felt, didn't really have those points and just makes it an easier watch, even though they kind of have a similar vibe in the fact that they are a horror movie. For cinematography all time, out of 21 movies, it's going to be 7th. Again, just below The Mist and above Gran Turismo. It's still above Gran Turismo for the same reasons as before, but it's below The Mist because I felt The Mist really brought an emotional aspect that Beetlejuice doesn't. There's parts that aren't done well in The Mist as far as visuals. They don't look as good, and that's partly just because of the time and CGI, but they use it well. They don't show a whole lot of things that look bad, but really, like I said before, I prioritize that emotion. And the characters in The Mist, man, there's some you hate and there's some you love that you cheer for, and they do a really good job of just making you feel what you're supposed to feel towards certain characters. And Beetlejuice just has a visual aspect, but really almost no emotional aspect. That's all I've got for Beetlejuice. Please let me know what your thoughts are on the movie if you've seen it. Do you think it was better than the original one, or do you agree that I feel is really just on the same par? Do you think there was a sequel that was needed? Other than that, make sure you comment what your favorite Halloween movie is, and Make sure you like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you want to see more reviews. Comment what movie you would like to see me review next. I'm Mr. Majoritarian. Stay classy, San Diego.